Thank you, Pon. I'm pleased to be with you here, and I'm especially pleased to be here with you because to be in a room full of big city realtors. One reason is, one way I play expert in this state is to take what I learn at one meeting to the next meeting. So the next meeting I go to, I'll be able to say, what's happened to the property values in Fort Wayne, and then people will really think I'm tied together and know what's going on in the state. So I'm hoping to learn a little bit here from you, as well as convey a little information about Indiana property taxes in 2010. And as you probably know better than most Indiana citizens, the property tax has been in what can charitably be described as chaos for the last 10 years, ever since the Supreme Court's market value decision of December 1998. We have been struggling to bring the property tax into compliance with the Constitution and then deal with the fallout of the tax shifts and the changes in assessment requirements and all that sort of thing. We've gone through two major property tax and really state and local tax reforms, one in 2002 and one in 2008. But I think that right now we're in the process of settling in, and there is, I think, a light at the end of the tunnel here in terms of coming to a system that might actually be a little more stable and a little more consistent over the next few years. Of course, the legislature can always make more changes if they like, but I think I can show you that we're coming to it. And so let's take a look. This is my property tax bill, actually, right here, and it is. I thought I'd put it up here. It's my property tax bill, even though it very clearly says not a bill on the stamped on it there. And that's because the bill itself went to my mortgage lender, of course. But these days, Indiana will send information to the owners of the property, and so we get to see what the property tax bill looks like. And I thought, since I have my bill, I thought I'd put it up here and actually use the numbers. It's a piece of property that I know better than any other piece of property, so I thought we'd take a look at those numbers and see what you can see about property taxes in Indiana, what the policy is. You'll notice on the handout I've got an outline as to what's been happening with property taxes in Indiana since 2008, since the big reforms. But I'll talk about that outline while talking about the results of those policies and how they show up on my property tax bill. So here's the first part of it. It's a homestead, qualifies as a homestead, of course, because it's an owner-occupied primary residence. And that's the definition of a homestead. And boy, do you want to be a homestead in this state. Because if you're not a homestead, they're really going to hit you with property taxes, right? The property tax relief that went out as a result of the 2008 property tax reform was property tax relief directed to homeowners. Homeowners got by far the lion's share of the tax relief. And I'll show you that while rental property, rental housing got some, commercial, industrial, and agriculture have actually not gotten any property tax relief at all out of the 2008 reforms. Now, in some places, they've gotten some, but most places not so much. So it really is homesteads that have seen the property tax relief, and we'll see from my tax bill where that relief has come from. Here's the gross assessed value, a part of the tax bill. You start out at the very top with the gross assessed value, so this is what the assessor thinks the property is worth. And since we're now a market value state, and we have been since taxes payable in 2003, that number down there, $202,100, is supposed to be a prediction of what my house could sell for if it was put on the market, or if it had been put on the market last year. And so $202,100. And so, I looked at that and I saw, well, they had it at 211, and now they've got it at 202. And I found myself thinking, gee, the recession is hitting the value of my house. And I'm, as an economist, I always find it entertaining on some level when great big macroeconomic events actually affect me personally. I don't know if the rest of the world feels that way, but I said, wow, look at that. My house value is being affected by the recession and the decline in property values. And I said, well, that's kind of too bad. Reduces my property taxes a little bit, so I guess that's a good thing. But gee, is the value of my house falling? And then I thought, wait a minute, think about what I'm doing. I'm looking at this number as if it was an appraisal of my house and not just the assessment. And up until 2002, nobody in Indiana would have done that. because the assessments of our property up until 2002 under the old true tax value system had nothing to do with predicting selling prices. It was a bureaucratic system back then where you'd take this 2-volume manual and you'd follow through the steps, and the number that you got was, by definition, the right answer if you followed the steps correctly. And that number that you got was not supposed to have anything to do with the actual selling prices of houses. But now we're a market value state, and we've been struggling since 2003 to get the assessment system in line with the idea that this is now a kind of analytical system rather than a bureaucratic system where, using whatever methods they can, the assessors are supposed to come up with assessed values that are predictions of selling prices. Now, you guys know better than I do whether that's being achieved here in Allen County or not. But I look at that and I say, you know, that's not so bad. I bet it could, well, probably not that much. Right? It's probably a little high, but I'm sure it's within 10%. And has the value of my house falling? Well, probably it is. And I've met other people out there who are starting to look at these numbers and thinking about them as measures of potential selling price. In fact, I had a story out of Monroe County where the assessor got a phone call saying, hey, you've reduced the assessed value of my house. Put it back the way it was. I want a higher assessment. And that's the first time the assessor had ever received a call like that. And she said, how come? And she said, well, I'm putting the house on the market. And if the potential sellers see the assessed value going down, they're going to think the house isn't worth as much as I want to charge for it. And I just lit up at that, saying, you know, if that kind of thing is happening, then we are actually making progress in this state towards the market value system as it is supposed to be. Now, undoubtedly, there are problems all over the place about assessed values not matching appraisals and not matching selling prices, and that's what the ratio studies are supposed to discover that they do every year, comparing selling prices to assessed values. But from what I'm hearing, we are making progress in that direction. And so that's one reason I'm kind of optimistic about what's happening with assessment administration in this state. And the second reason has to do with this here. Oh, there we go. I'm from Purdue. I work with lasers. It's usually a laugh line. All right. Date of notice, April 2nd, 2010. Postmark, April 13th, 2010. Tippecanoe County got their bills out on time, and they collected their bills. They collected the revenue on May 10th. That was the due date. This year, 85 of the 92 counties got their bills out on time. Last year, 2 counties got their bills out on time. The year before that, none of the counties got their bills out on time. That is progress. I just imagine the tremendous amount of work that must have been going on there in the assessor, auditor, treasurer's office to bring this thing back on track in the course of a year, moving from 2 to 85 counties getting them out on time. And, you know, since 2003, since the big market value reassessment of 2003, the administration, as you know, it's just been chaotic. But now I think we're back on track. There was a time, just a couple of years ago, when I was wondering whether all of the new things that were required of assessors, trending, the annual updating of assessed values, the ratio studies, the new requirements for categories of assessed value that hadn't been categories before under our new tax caps, whether it was actually possible to do all the things that are now required in the time that's actually allotted in the budget process. And the answer now is obviously yes, it is possible. And so I think as we move into this next decade, assessment's going to get better. And so I'm fairly optimistic about that aspect of the thing. So anyway, there's the assessed value. That's the gross assessed value of my property, $202,100. And there it is again. And so now we subtract the deductions. Right, what happens next? We subtract the deductions. And the first one they've got on the tax bill is $48,000. That's a little unfortunate because that's the sum of two. That's the sum of the $45,000 standard deduction and the $3,000 mortgage deduction. Now, most homeowners get both of those. Most homesteads get both of those. But they've combined the two, which unfortunately hides one of the aspects of the next calculations. Now, that 45 and the 3 that's in here, those have been around for quite some time. The standard deduction's been around for quite a while, although at $45,000, that only happened in the middle of the last decade to put it up that high. The $3,000 mortgage deduction has been around as long as I can remember. This next one here, the next deduction, the supplemental deduction, is new with the tax reform of 2008, and that's the 35% supplemental deduction. And what you do is you take the gross assessed value, you subtract the 45, and then you take 35% of the remainder. And if you make that calculation, you'll get $54,985. In other words, the new tax reform from March 2008 subtracted an extra third from the assessed value, the taxable assessed value of homestead property. That's where the tax relief for homeowners is coming from nowadays. Right? That's where it's coming from. So you subtract that off, and we end up with a taxable assessed value on my house of $99,115 compared to the gross assessed value of $202,100. Less than half of the value of my house is actually taxable. And like I say, that's where the tax relief of homeowners is coming from. For most other kinds of property, and I'll show you a couple of examples, virtually all of the assessed value is taxable assessed value. Gross assessed value and taxable assessed value, or gross and net, are the same because they don't get much in the way of deductions. Homesteads, less than half, and for properties that are of lower value, if you had a $120,000 property up here, which is the median home value in Indiana, you're still subtracting the 45, because that's a fixed number, and so you'd get maybe a third of the value of the house is actually taxable. So that's where the tax relief for homesteads actually coming from. Well, there you get the net assessed value of property. We then multiply it by the tax rate. Tax rate, I live in the city of West Lafayette, so the tax rate is up above 2, but that's not so high for a city, so it's 2.2079. We measure that as $2.21 per $100 of assessed value is the terminology that's usually used. If you think about it, that also means, though, 2.2%. So it's 2.2% of $99,115 equals the gross tax liability of $2,188, and that's down 2.6% from what it had been in 2009 because the taxable value of taxable assessed value had actually gone down because the assessor thought my house was worth less this year than it was last year. So that's your gross tax liability, and one thing to remember is that this tax rate right here, that's the tax rate in the taxing district in which I live. And a tax district, that's a terminology which in Indiana means it is a unique combination of the county, the township, the city or town, the school corporation, the library district, and where I live, the Greater Lafayette Transportation District, the Solid Waste Management District. All of those tax rates added together add up to this $2.21, and I live in a particular combination of those units. You know, if I'd move a mile to my south, I'd be still in the city, but I'd be in the West Lafayette Library District instead of the Tippecanoe County Library District. So a taxing district is a combination of a particular set of layers or overlapping units. And there are 30-something in Tippecanoe County, and here in Allen County there are, somebody just told me, 47, okay, and I've got the list of those. So taxing district, and that's important because it's this total rate, as we'll see, matters for the tax caps. The total rate that matters. So multiply the total rate, and that's $21.88, and there's a gross tax liability. Now we've got some credits. Credits are different from deductions in that they are subtracted off of the tax bill after it's been calculated. You take the rate times the assessed value, you get the gross tax liability, and then you subtract credits. Deductions take place before the multiplication, right? You subtract the deductions from the assessed value before you multiply it by the tax rate. So there's two sets up here. Tippecanoe County's got some local property tax credits. These are funded by the local option income taxes. They passed a couple of the local option income taxes. They take that revenue, and some of it gets devoted to property tax relief for homeowners, and the total's a little bit less than 10% actually. And then there's the state homestead credit right here, and everybody in the state gets that. And you'll notice that one declined pretty good. That one declined by about 45%. And that's because these homestead credits are being phased out. Used to be that we delivered a lot of property tax relief to homeowners with homestead credits. But with the reform of 2008, we decided instead to do it with deductions and not with credits. And so the credits are being phased out, and by 2011, this number is going to drop to zero, actually. For 2009, $140 million were appropriated from the state for homestead credits. In 2010, it was $80 million. In 2011, it will be zero. So that's, well, it was, I did get $154 of tax reduction from the credit in 2009. Now I'm going to only get 85, and in 2011, I'm going to get zero. And that turns my nice tax reduction up here into a tax increase, actually, from 1874 to 1888, and not a big tax increase, but there it is. You notice a couple of zeros, sets of zeros down here. Those are the tax caps. That's the tax cap credit. And the way the tax cap works is you take the percentage, and it being a homestead, we're in the 1% tax cap category. You multiply that 1%, let me go back, by the gross assessed value of the property. So the tax cap is 1% of gross assessed value, which would be, and move the comma over there, $2,021. So under the tax cap as of 2010, the maximum amount I can pay in property taxes is $2,021. I'm not going to pay that much, right? I'm at 1888 right here, which means that there's no reason for me to get a tax cap credit to bring me down to the cap. So I get nothing as far as that part of tax relief. This one right here, this is the tax credit for people over age 65, and I'm not there yet. So I don't qualify for that, but folks over age 65 on their homesteads are limited to a 2% increase per year, and even if I was over 65, that wouldn't have happened to me because I only had a 7/10 of an increase. But had that been more than 2%, I would have gotten a credit in order to bring it down to 2%. So that's how the tax bills are calculated for a homestead, but I thought it might be interesting to take a look at a non-homestead. What would happen if I decided to rent my house instead of living in it? Then it's no longer a homestead, because homestead is owner-occupied primary residence. Let's take a look at what happened with the property taxes on this thing if it was a rental, not an owner-occupied homestead. Well, the assessed value doesn't change. Shouldn't change anyway. Although the calculations that are done for rentals are different, so it's conceivable actually that it could go down. When they do assessment on a rental, you do three different methods. Right? You do this comparative sales method, which was used for this. You do the construction costs less depreciation method. And then you do the capitalization method. You take the rent, you divide it by an interest rate, and you come up with capitalized value. And the landlords actually won this right in the legislature a few years ago. You do it three ways, and you take the smallest number. So it's not impossible that the assessed value would be lower, but let's suppose it's not, just to come up with a comparison. Homestead, non-homestead, both $202,100. Here's the big difference. It's not a homestead, so it doesn't get the homestead standard deduction. I didn't give it the mortgage deduction either, because if this rental house is owned by lots of different, or if a landlord owns several different rentals, you only get one homestead deduction, but most importantly, don't get the 35% supplemental deduction. So I don't get any deductions, so my taxable assessed value is $202,100, not $99,115. That makes a huge difference. As you can imagine, we multiply it by the tax rate, and the non-homestead gross tax liability, $4,462 compared to $2,188. More than doubles. And I've talked to people who have decided, hey, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to rent my old one. And sticker shock on the tax bill, I guess, doubles, triples sometimes when something moves from homestead to non-homestead. We go further than that. Since it is not a homestead, these are homestead credits, no credits on the homestead, but, all right, this is in the 2% category. 2% of gross assessed value, tax cap category, is $4,042. Right? 4,462 is higher than 4,042. So, rental housing, if I rent out this house, it would get a tax cap credit of $420, which would bring the tax bill down to $4,042, okay, instead of $1,888. So, qualifying for a homestead tax cap I should say qualifying for a tax cap credit's kind of a mixed bag, isn't it? Yeah, you're getting some tax relief, hooray! But you're getting you some tax relief because your taxes are so high, right? So people who are not qualifying for the tax cap credits might want to complain, as people are wont to do, but the reason you don't qualify is that your taxes aren't high enough, right? If you live in a place where tax rates are high, or your property is not a homestead, you're more likely to qualify, but that's because your tax bill is so high. So that knocks the tax bill down to $4,042. Suppose instead of my house, there was a small hotel on that property, which would make it commercial property, or we turned it into, I don't know, a sweatshop. Now it's a textile factory, all right? Suppose it has the same assessed value. What would the tax bill look like? Well, then it's in the 3% tax cap category. 3% of, where is it, 202,100 would be 6,063. That's the tax cap for commercial industrial. 6,063, right? We changed that to 3%. Well, it's not nearly that high. And so if it was commercial industrial property, would have paid the full 4,462. So if we compare just for my little tax bill there, you look at the homestead, I'm almost but not quite eligible for tax cap credits. All right, the tax bill was 1888, the tax cap was 2021 in the 1% category. Had it been a rental, it would have been eligible for tax cap credits of $420. That pre-tax, pre-credit bill, 4462, tax cap at 4,042. Had it been commercial property, it would have been not eligible for credits and not even close. Having said that, let's take a look at what's happening to tax bills statewide for the data we've got so far in Indiana in 2010, and then over the period 2007 to 2010. So here's a bunch of bar charts, and we got data. I had data when I made this chart for 61 counties. The data's still rolling in to the Legislative Services Agency, and they're kind enough to give me their data, and I work with them analyzing property taxes and figure out what's going on. So we've got for 61 counties, doesn't include Allen yet. We don't have Allen's data in there yet, but enough to give an idea as to what's going on. And the gray line is how the change, what the changes have been from 2007 to 2010, which is the whole period of the phase-in of the new tax regime from the reforms of March 2008. And the blue line there are what's just happened between 2009 and 2010. Well, homesteads, you see, statewide, about a 1% reduction this time. I think that's probably mainly due to declines in assessed value due to trending and lower market values on homes. It's due to that, and due a little bit as well to the tightening of the tax cap. In 2009, the tax cap was 1.5%, now it's 1%. And in places, and I'll show you what kind of tax rate is required to make you a homestead eligible, but in places where tax rates are particularly high, homesteads are qualifying for those, and that's reducing homestead tax bills as well. Over the whole period, though, 29% reduction, almost 1/3 reduction in property tax for homesteads, and that's due to the deductions that kicked in 2009. Right? Great big reductions in homestead property taxes due to that. You take a look at non-homestead residential and apartments, these are mostly rentals. Now, non-homestead residential includes second homes, which is important in LaGrange and important in Brown County and places like that. But mostly it's smaller rental units up to 4 apartments. Beyond that, they're counted as commercial apartments. And as you can see, reductions in property taxes on those as well. Not due to deductions, because they don't get the deductions, but due instead to the tax caps, right, the 2% tax caps. And even at 2.5, the apartments and non-homestead residentials were benefiting, but they got a good deal of extra benefit when it tightened from 2.5, which is what the limit was in 2009, to 2%, which is what it is right now. Now, why does rental property, why does rental housing get so much in the way of reductions from the tax cap credits? There's 3 reasons. One is they don't get any deductions. So compared to homeowners, the tax bills are higher. Second reason is they've got a tighter cap than the rest of business property. The rest of business property is at 3, they're at 2. Landlords won 1 in the legislature somehow. So that's the second reason. Third reason, most rental housing is located in cities and towns where the tax rates are higher. So no deductions, higher tax rates, tighter cap. Rental housing is benefiting from the tax caps more so than any other kind of unit. Well, what's happening to agriculture? They're seeing the taxes go up because for a reason unrelated actually to the tax reforms, the assessed value of farmland is rising as high commodity prices from 2007 to 2008 are incorporated into the formula for assessing farmland. So that's an entire talk to my agricultural audiences, as you can imagine. They're quite concerned with that. But agricultural property going up. But this is other real, that's commercial industrial. Not benefiting so much from the tax caps because of 3%. Most places don't have tax rates high enough. Now we don't yet have the data for Lake and St. Joe and Delaware incorporated in here. And what we found out last time is when that data came in, those are the places where commercial industrial property does benefit from the tax caps simply because there's a lot of commercial industrial property in those places, in Gary and South Bend and Muncie, and they have very high tax rates. So there will be some additional benefit from the tax caps in just those places. But what we found out in 2009 is that something like 90% of all the tax cap credits that went to commercial industrial property was in Lake, St. Joe, and Delaware, and the rest of the state saw hardly any. A little bit skewed when you get the result statewide. Personal property, as you see, that's business equipment now. That's all that's left in personal property. Hasn't seen the big increases that real property, land and buildings have seen in commercial industrial. And the reason for that is that back in the day under the old system, we never gave much tax relief to personal property. So when we removed it, when we got rid of the property tax replacement credits and other sorts of things, didn't affect personal property that much. What we see up there is in total, we've got a decline in the amount of property taxes collected. That's due to the sales tax increase that we had in 2008. We raised the sales tax and funneled that into property tax relief. And we've seen a 1.9% decrease in the net total levy just this year, and that's due to tax cap credits. And one of the things that your local government officials can tell you is that these tax cap credits are losses in revenue for local governments. And this is the first time that the state has ever offered property tax credits to local taxpayers and not replace the money from its budget. Used to be that the state had about $2 billion in property tax relief in its budget, and they would give credits, homestead credits, property tax replacement credits for all taxpayers. They would give these credits to local taxpayers. Local taxpayers would then pay smaller tax bills to their local units, but the state would say, but we will replace that money you have lost. With these new tax cap credits, the state is not replacing the money. So all of the tax cap credit losses, or all the tax cap credit tax breaks to taxpayers, are tax losses for local governments. And that's one of the things that local governments are dealing with here as the new policies kick in. Well, here's some data from 2009. As I said, we haven't got Allen County for 2010 in yet. But you can find this, the data. You might want to take a look if you want to keep track of what's going on with property taxes. The Legislative Services Agency website has reports county by county on what's going on with property taxes. And they've got one for 2008, they've got one for 2009, and this summer we'll write them up for 2010 and get them posted as well. So by the end of the summer, I hope we'll have most of them up. But you can take a look and see just what's happening in Allen County. And what this is a analysis of what happened to homestead property taxes. And it shows you that, for example, the change from 2007 to 2009, which again is the period of the phase-in of the new tax relief for homeowners. You can see that, a little bit more than half of all the homesteads in Allen County were in the 20 to 40% range in terms of their tax bills being reduced, that there were 1,549 homesteads in Allen County that saw their property taxes go down by 100%. I mean, that's from whatever it was to zero, right? So there are homeowners in Allen County that do not pay property taxes. You go, there are actually 3 poster children for this. Montgomery, Miami, and Wabash counties not only got all the state relief, but also introduced local option income taxes, and on average saw their homeowner property taxes go down by 80%. So hardly any homeowners paying hardly any property taxes in those counties. That didn't happen in Allen County, though, but the average reduction about 30% since 2007. A little bit of an increase from 08 to 09, but overall, since 2007, the tax reform delivering the tax relief to homeowners, 98% of all homeowners seeing lower tax bills in 2009 than they saw in 2007. Well, what about everybody else? Well, here's this bar chart here that shows all of the kinds of property taxpayers. And you got on the top there, it was in 2007, about $143 million homesteads paid, and it was down to $106 million in 2009. Non-homestead residential and commercial apartments, the rental property, also down in Allen County over that 2-year period. And then we come to agriculture from 6.9 to 8. That's up, and there's a lot of farmland in Allen County, but farmland in general, other than in the mainly rural areas, farmland tends to be a very small share of the total assessed value. And as you can see, that's true here in an urban county like this. Other real and personal also, well, no, other real is up from 96.9 to 115, so that's about that's close to a 20% increase in commercial industrial property taxes. And then personal property down a little bit, and that's business equipment. So on the whole, business and agricultural property taxes up, homestead and rental housing down in Allen County, and that's just like the state. The state had the same pattern. Well, let's take a look at these tax cap credits, and I've got the chart in your handout here. Let me take a look at it. It's on page 6 of your handout, and here's a piece of it up here. So I didn't want to print this whole thing, and it'd be kind of hard to see. And there's the county total at the top, and what do you see? These are in thousands of dollars, so that number right there is $24.6 million. And 9.8 million is in the 1% category, 14 million in the 2% category, and $275,000 in the 3% category. Now, one thing we've learned so far about how these tax cap credits work is that because in the 2% category you've got rental housing and commercial and industrial property in the 2% and 3% categories, those kinds of properties don't get much in deductions, which means that the gross assessed value and the net assessed value are pretty close. And the tax caps are applied to the gross, and the tax rate is applied to the net. But if the gross and the net are approximately the same, then you can compare those two. And what that means is that if you're in the 2% category, you'll be eligible for a tax cap credit if you're in a place where the tax rate is higher than $2. And if you're in the 3% category, you'll be eligible if you're in a place where the tax rate is higher than $3. And that works for the rental housing and the commercial industrial. It doesn't work for homeowners because of all those deductions. The gross and the net are so different. But for all the other property, all the other non-homestead property, you can do that. And so what do we see? Jackson Township, tax rate $1.63, no tax cap credits. No taxpayers in that taxing district, which is defined by Jackson Township. No taxpayers are eligible for the tax cap credits because the tax rate's not high enough. All right, we look at Perry Township here, $2.14. You do have some that are eligible. Some homeowners, and because it's over $2, got the $90,000 in rental housing. But you look at the Fort Wayne districts, 288, 286, 297, you add that extra city tax rate to the total, and the tax rates are closer to 3 than they are to 2. Still, in these particular tax districts, right, nobody in the 3%, no commercial industrial property eligible for tax cap credits, but a great deal of rental housing eligible, right? 3, 5, that's about almost $10.5 million in tax cap credits in those 3 taxing districts. Then we come down to Fort Wayne Perry at 336. That's the highest tax rate in the county, and sure enough, that's where all of the commercial industrial property that receives tax cap credits actually exists, okay? So very little in tax cap credits for commercial industrial property, even in Allen County, which, statewide is a big city, so relatively high tax rates. Most of the tax cap credits going to rental housing and going to homeowners. So you've got about, well, almost 60% in the 2% category, a little less than 40% in the 1% category, and maybe 1% in the 3% category. And this is the kind of pattern that we're seeing in most counties in the state outside of Lake, St. Joe, and Delaware counties. So, rule of thumb. Actually, have I got the rule of thumb up here? Not yet, no. Okay, another thing to say. Allen County, I've got the list for the 75 counties for which we've got data on this so far. That's on pages 7 and 8. Allen County units in total lost about 7.1% of their levy to the tax cap credits. Remember, the tax cap credits, that's taxes that the local taxpayers do not pay. As a percentage of the total levy, about 7.1%. Statewide percentage was 5.6. So Allen County, as you would expect, big city, urban county, is a somewhat higher rate. But if you take a look, there are places with much higher losses there. And in your neighborhood here, Huntington County at 11%. Got double-digit losses. But you look down the list here, and you've got Cass County with Logansport, particularly high rates in that city, losing 16.7% of their tax levy to the tax cap credits. We turn to page Vigo, Terre Haute there, losing 14.7. We don't have here the big three, Delaware, Lake, and St. Joe, but I've seen Delaware's data. That's come in since I printed up this table. Delaware County is losing more than 20% of its tax levy to the tax cap credits. The city of Muncie is losing more than 30% of its tax levy to the tax cap credits. So places with high tax rates tend to, or the taxpayers in those places tend to benefit from the tax caps, but that also means that their local governments have less revenue to work with. So statewide percentage 5.6. It'll probably be a little higher than that when we get all of the counties in, but that's in the neighborhood of where we'll be. Well, what about the tax caps and homesteads? You can't do that nice comparison to a tax rate with homesteads because the net and the gross are so different. And the tax caps are applied to the gross, and the tax rates are applied to the net. And so I came up with this chart here which says, let's take a look at a homestead that gets the $45,000 standard deduction, the supplemental homestead of 35% of what's remaining, and then give them the $3,000 mortgage deduction as well. What combinations of gross assessed values and tax rates are required to make a homestead eligible for the tax cap credits? And as you can see, the line slopes downward. And the reason it slopes downward is that $45,000 standard deduction is fixed. You know, if you do the arithmetic, $45,000 reduction in your assessed value if your home's worth $100,000 is a much bigger impact than if your home is worth $1 million. Right? If your home is worth $1 million, it's pocket change. If your home is worth $100,000, it's virtually half. So in terms of percentage reduction of your tax bill, that $45,000 has a much bigger impact at the lower levels than at the upper levels of gross assessed values, which means that, for calculations of tax caps, upper valued homes are eligible for tax cap credits at lower tax rates than our lower valued homes. So at $2, for example, you'd have to have a home above $200, $220, somewhere in there, in order to make it eligible. At $4, you'd only need about $75,000. Out here, we're in the $1.55 or so range when you get up to $1 million. And if we went out to infinity, it'd be $1.33, but $1 million pretty much covers it. Net tax rate over here, not the gross tax rate. So this is the tax rate that's actually charged minus all those local percentage credits. And so I reduced those. And what that means is that these these counties that adopt the local option income taxes for property tax relief can reduce their net tax rates and reduce the number of homeowners who are eligible for the tax cap credit, and therefore reduce their revenue losses from tax cap credits. And I think probably what we're going to see over the next several years are a lot of different counties considering more local option income taxes, which in an accounting sense are devoted dollar for property tax relief, but in actuality, because they reduce your losses from tax cap credits, actually raise your property tax revenue. So that's the combinations. Those are all the combinations of gross assessed values and net tax rates. You know, I did just this on a spreadsheet. This is kind of I don't know if you want to call it a theory, but I took the arithmetic and put it in a spreadsheet and made a prediction about what it would be. So kind of wanted to check this theory to see if it is actually working. And now we've got the data to do it. Now the data is coming in, and we can actually see who's eligible, as far as homeowners are concerned, for the tax cap credits. Well, this is statewide for something like 65 counties for which I had the data when I did this chart. Looked at the gross assessed value and looked at the percentage of homeowners who were getting tax cap credits statewide at each gross assessed value. And sure enough, the higher is your gross assessed, oops, not the laser. Higher is your gross assessed value, the bigger the percentage of homeowners are eligible. Now, what this means is that if you're at $120,000, you've got about 10%. Those are places where the tax rates are particularly high. But as your gross assessed value goes up, sure enough, more and more taxpayers, homeowners are eligible for the tax cap credits, up to about $250,000, and then it's, the increase stops and it sort of bounces around in the 35% to 40% range. But you see why that is. If you take a look at 250 right there, we've crossed under 2, and after that, nothing much happens to the tax rate, right? It doesn't decline by very much. And so at that point, we wound up with this. So if you think about it, that and that are mirror images of one another, and that made me feel good because that meant that I was right? Or at least fairly consistent. The data's fairly consistent with the prediction there. The other thing that we think we know, right? We know that as values go up, more homeowners are eligible for the tax cap credits. We also know that as rates go up, as the net tax rate is higher, more homeowners are eligible for the tax cap credit. So here's a scatter diagram which puts the tax rates, the net tax rates after credits, down here, and puts the share of homesteads receiving the tax cap credit in each taxing district over here. So one would expect that higher tax rates, you'd have bigger shares, and well, it's you know, certainly mostly you got zeros down here, right? When you're under $1.50, you know, there's a couple of little I don't know what's going on there. We'll have to look those up and see if errors had been made. But under about $1.57, your taxing districts will not have any homes eligible for the tax cap credit, no matter how expensive the homes are. And 286, after that, you're going to have homes that are eligible. Right? Once you get to 286, there's going to be homes that will be eligible. What does it take for 286? 286 is about there. So that's basically, what, 120, 110. So if your tax rate is 286, any home valued at 110 or above likely to be eligible for the tax cap credits. Most taxing districts in this state will have homes, at least a home, valued at 110,000. There's some rural areas where there won't be very many, but that's what this is saying. So basically, here's the range. Somewhere between $1.57 and 286, homes begin to become eligible for the tax cap credits. So rules of thumb on tax cap credits, just sort of trying to put this information down into ways you can think about it. Districts with net tax rates less than $3 will have no credits in the 3% category. You got to have a tax rate above 3 in order to make commercial industrial eligible. Districts with net tax rates less than $2 will have no credits in the 2% category. So rental housing requires a tax rate above $2 for it to be eligible. By the way, just as an aside, farmland is also in the 2% category. But one of the things, you know, I was actually born in New York City and grew up on Long Island, so I somehow ended up in an agricultural economics department anyway, without knowing a whole lot about farming, I must tell you. But I have picked up some ideas now and then, you know, just wandering around the halls and listening to my colleagues. And one of the things I've learned is that most farmland is not in cities and towns. Okay, which means that, it's good, huh? Which means that most farmland is in places where the tax rate is less than $2, because only in cities and towns is the tax rate consistently above $2, which means that hardly any farmland is eligible for the tax cap credits. You know, less than 1% of all tax cap credits is going to farmland, and that must be in places where the farmland has been annexed by a city and they're just waiting for it to develop, right? And so you ask the question, how could the Farm Bureau, those haters of property taxes, actually be against the constitutional amendment to cap property taxes? How could that be? Because they don't benefit, that's why. Doesn't do anything for farmland. So there you go. That's an explanation for that. Districts with net tax rates less than $1.50 won't have credits in the 1% category homesteads. Districts with net tax rates greater than $2.80 will almost certainly have some homesteads getting tax cap credits. So we've got the ranges of tax rates now that give us some idea as to when there will be tax cap credits by which kinds of property. Well, I had another thing that I wanted to look at, and that is what's been the impact of the recession on homestead gross assessed values. And I looked at my own tax bill and said, this doesn't look so good. So what has been the effect? And so what I did was just do this scatter diagram here. County unemployment rate for the last 3 years, 2007, 2008, 2009 assessment years, 2008, 2009, 2010 tax years, and looked at the change in gross assessed value for homesteads county by county. So we did this in county. So you can get county unemployment rates. This is the percentage change in the gross assessed value. And sure enough, the thing's got this downward slope. I ran a trend line through it and did all that stuff. But anyway, downward slope, right? The higher is your unemployment rate, the more the less gross assessed value of homesteads went up, the more it went down. Now we can look at a couple of, once you've got the trend line up there, we can look at a couple of sort of averages here. One is, well, let's do it this way. One is, I thought I'd put that, 12% unemployment, and there are a bunch of counties in Indiana with unemployment rates higher than 12. That's when typically you start to see declines in the gross assessed value of homesteads countywide. Less than 12%, just smaller increases. If we were at 5, which is where we'd like to be for unemployment rates, that's where we were in 2007 for the nation, 4% growth year after year. So why is this happening? Well, I think it's a combination of declining new construction and the trending catching the declines in market values of homesteads. So definitely, there's clear evidence statewide that higher unemployment rates, the recession, is actually affecting the values of homesteads. And you might say, well, you guys are real estate, you probably know all about this stuff. But for those of us in the assessment biz, or at least people like me who follow the thing, this is weird, because this has never been true in any recession we've ever had before. Because prior, the last recession, we didn't have trending, right? So assessed values never changed. You'd get a little reaction, you could see a little bit because home construction would decline in most recessions, not so much in 2001, but in most recessions it would decline. So you'd see a little bit of an impact, but trending has really emphasized this thing. If home values go down because of a recession, trending's picking it up, which tells us that maybe trending is working, at least for homesteads, which is good news from the assessment administration front, but shows you that gross assessed value, countywide assessed value, going to grow more slowly during recessions than it used to, means that the property tax is more vulnerable to recessions than it used to be. It's not the stable revenue. It's still the most stable of all the revenue sources, but not as stable as it was back when we didn't trend. Right? So trending having that kind of impact. A few rules of thumb on that. Added 1% unemployment rate reduces homestead gross assessed value growth by about 0.5% per year. Right? Each extra 1 point here pulls that down by about 0.5 point. So if your unemployment rate goes up by 1 percentage point, on average, your gross assessed value growth declines by about 0.5 point. Homestead gross assessed value tend to fall when the unemployment rate rises above 12. When the unemployment rate is 5, homestead gross assessed value grows by about 4% per year. So some rules of thumb on the interaction of recession and homestead gross assessed values. One other thing, your homeowners are receiving with their tax bills this time the pink form. All right? This is probably something you guys need to know about, and you probably already do. But this is an attempt, well, first of all, it's really lucrative to have your property identified as a homestead. Right? If you can get that thing identified as a homestead, you'll cut your tax bill in half or more. And so, there are, we suspect, a handful of less than scrupulous people out there who are taking more than one homestead deduction. Now, a homestead is defined as owner-occupied primary residence, so you can only have one. You can only live in one spot, according to our tax code. And so, presumably there are these people out there and getting tax breaks that they shouldn't be getting. Now, we do not have a system in this state for checking this across county lines. So you could have one in LaGrange, and you could have one in Allen, and you could be taking the both, and the LaGrange assessor auditor and the Allen assessor auditor wouldn't know. This form is an attempt by the Department of Local Government Finance, the oversight agency for property tax in Indiana, to collect some data so they can set up a system to cross-check across counties and find people who are taking more than one homestead deduction. Now, one thing to know about this is you got to fill it out at some point, and in 2013 and after. If you don't have one of these on file, they won't give you the homestead deduction. So it's probably a good idea to file this thing, but the consequences are not immediate. Right? Tax year 2013 is the next time. Yeah?
Will that form help across state lines like Florida?
Oh, that's a good question. No, it won't. It won't. Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure what the law says about that. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, repeat the question. Would the cross-checking of the homestead deductions work across state lines? And I'm not sure what the law says about that, whether you can claim one Indiana residence as a homestead even if you live most of the year somewhere else. So I'm not sure about that, but I don't think there are any plans of cross-checking across state lines.
It's based on the marriage. Only one marriage is a homestead. I've heard some folks who buy, if husband and wife will buy the property in Florida, put the wife's name.
Oh, I see. Yeah. That's a good question. I really don't know the answer to that. I do not know of any plans to cross-check. I think that'd be pretty tough to do because our separate systems of assessment and record keeping are so different across the different states. But perhaps something like that will come. But this is mainly addressing the county by county here in Indiana. Yeah?
Florida and Michigan are checking now.
Are checking for our homesteads? Okay, well, I didn't know that. Well, apparently Florida and Michigan, we're getting them to check. And so what this has got up here, you notice it's got, they want a piece of your social security number, they want a piece of your driver's license number, feed this thing into a database, do the cross-checking. From here on in, anybody who files for a homestead will simply file this form. But so what this form is going back and collecting the data for everybody who's already got the homestead. Now, one of the dangers of this, and I've heard this already happening, some people know, and this is true, that you only have to file for the homestead deduction once, and then it continues. And so it might be that people will make the mistake saying, well, this is for folks who haven't filed. Well, no, it isn't. It's for everybody. It's just back collection of data is what this is. So your homeowners need to file this thing, but there are no penalties for not filing it until 2013.
Is there anything repeating that, like every 4 years or something?
The question is there any repeating every 4 years? It shouldn't happen that way because we should be filing this form as new deductions occur. So if there's a new house and it qualifies as a homestead, you'll file for the homestead and you'll file this form. But I suppose it's possible this might become part of the reassessment process, going out and recollecting all the data like we always do. But I'm not sure whether we've got a policy yet for what we're going to do after 2013 with this thing. So that's a good question as to whether this will have to be, whether you'll have to re-up at some point. Not as far as I know. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about referenda. I'm kind of up on this because West Lafayette had one on May 4th, and that's where I live. But you had one here as well. All of the referendum results, these are school referenda, are on page 13, and there's 42 of them so far. Since November of 2008, Southwest Allen had one in April of 2009, and it passed overwhelmingly. But here's the results of the school referenda, and we had 42 of them. 18 have passed, 24 have been defeated. And there's two different flavors of referenda now. One of the big reforms of the property tax in March of 2010 was to make capital projects subject to referenda. Now, prior to that, we had the petition remonstrance procedure, which was basically competing petition drives. And for smaller capital projects, that still exists. But for most of the big ones, if you're going to build any kind of school, for example, and an awful lot of the refurbishing and reconstruction sorts of projects, they're big enough that they will be submitted for referendum. And so we've had 27 capital projects referenda so far. 9 passed, 18 had been defeated. Then there's the other kind, which is the general fund tax. Now, as part of the tax reform, the state took over the school general fund. So all of the school general fund money now comes from the state aid formula. And as you probably noticed, the state's not doing so well as far as collecting revenue is concerned. And so we passed this new reform, handing school finance entirely, at least the general fund operating costs entirely to the state, in the very year that income and sales tax revenues collapsed, 2009. And it's kind of an unfortunate combination of events. That's put enough pressure on enough school budgets out there that we're starting to see a lot more of these general fund tax referenda, where basically the school board and the superintendent, they say to the voters, give us some extra property tax. You don't have to pay property tax for general fund unless you vote to do it. So let's vote to do it. And 9 have passed, 6 have been defeated, been 15 of them since November 2008. I got a little chart here that shows the percentage results and the dates there, and you know, up, down, some high, some low. We've had some very low there. That was Clinton Central, I think, where they proposed a capital projects referendum, and they proposed a new auditorium in the high school, which clearly the people didn't think they needed. Right? And so they got 14% yes and 86% no, and they redid the proposal after that. But you also had some big winners up there. Hamilton Southeastern and Speedway have had results over 80% voting yes. So big variation there. The thing that you especially noticed, though, I think, we had 16 of them on May 4th. All right, 16 of them on May 4th. We'd never had more than 10 prior to that, and I think that's going to be the rule in the future, at least for the foreseeable future. You're going to see a lot of these things. Now, one thing to know about this is that well, actually, I'll tell you, I'll go into that here in a minute, because we've got a new referendum, the big referendum on November 2nd, which is, should we put the tax caps into the state constitution? And so I thought I'd go over what the amendment actually says, and talk a little bit about what an informed voter might consider while making a decision as to which way to vote. But the tax cap, the actual amendment, is in your handout on pages 15 and 16. And the type that's in bold is the new stuff, and the type that's not in bold is what's in the Constitution right now. And, okay, so what does it say? Well, what's new? Section B, any credits or deductions are allowed if the property is mentioned here, is basically what that says. Basically creates 3 categories of property. This is a provision that's permitting exempt property. You can pretty much give any tax break you want to the homestead category, the 1% category, the rental housing, farmland category, or the commercial industrial category. We've creating really 3 separate kinds of property in Indiana that can be treated differently under our Constitution, and that's what B says right there. Section E just has the definitions of the property types. Section F gives the 1%, 2%, 3% caps by property type. And then Section G, taxes passed by referendum are outside the caps. And this has a couple of implications. But, you know, it's a significant weakening of the caps themselves. It means that any tax rate, capital projects tax rate funded by debt service, or a school general fund tax rate is not included under the cap. So you won't count that piece of your tax levy paid to a tax passed by referendum when you're measuring against your tax cap. So 2 things. Well, first of all, why did the legislature do this? This is a real weakening of the thing. This was actually a potential unintended consequence that the legislature anticipated and handled. Here's the problem. Suppose you're in a school district, say, where a lot of homeowners are already at their cap. And the tax rate is high enough. Maybe the city rate is high enough, not necessarily the school rate, but the tax rate is high enough so that a lot of homeowners are at the cap. And suppose we have a referendum, right? And the referendum could be a lot of different things. So the homeowner walks into the voting booth, and they see the referendum, and they say, oh, look, a high school. They want to build a high school. Well, gee, my kid might go to that high school. You know, no, here's a county jail. You know, they want to vote for a county. My kid might end up in that county jail, you know. So So we want to have these nice facilities, right? So yeah, I might vote for them, but oh, wait a minute, what's it going to cost me? Nothing, because you're already at your tax cap, right? It's just a beautiful example of how two separate provisions of law, both of which will reduce property taxes. The tax caps have already reduced property taxes. The referendum voting, it's going to pass much less frequently than the petition remonstrance system, because most capital projects did not get challenged under the petition remonstrance system. Both of those things are going to reduce property taxes, but when you put them together, they'll raise property taxes, at least in some jurisdictions, because it won't cost homeowners or voters anything. And so they said, all right, anything passed by a referendum is outside the cap, which means when you walk in the voting booth and you vote yes, you are indicating that you want the project and you're willing to pay for it. And that's what that means. Yeah.
You mentioned that right now we have two types of referendum in the state law. One is for the school general funds, and the other for capital projects of a lot of different types.
Right.
General Assembly could come along and pass a referendum provision for cities, for counties, or criminal justice, for example.
Yes. Yeah, they could.
That would then qualify for the exemption.
Now that we've got this thing in the Constitution, the legislature could authorize property tax referenda for other things besides capital projects and school general fund. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the cities and towns don't go to the legislature at some time in the future and say, hey, why can't we have referenda for general fund property taxes like the schools do? Why do they get it? Why can't we have it? What about the library districts? What about, all sorts of different local government units could have new kinds of referenda. And if that's the case, they'll be outside the caps. That's right. And for that reason. This also means that, the 1%, 2%, 3% caps, those percentages were chosen, I think, because they wanted it to be simple. You wanted to be able to look at your gross assessed value, say, hey, 1% of that, we move the decimal point over a couple of spots, that's my tax cap. I can't pay more than that. Our system is never going to be as simple as it is right now, because all of the big capital projects on into the future will have to be passed by referendum. They'll be outside the cap. All of the school general fund referenda will be outside the cap. Within just a few years, it will not be possible for a homeowner to look at their tax bill, see their gross assessed value, and know what their tax cap is. It will have to be calculated by the Department of Local Government Finance or the auditor, and it'll have to be put on the tax bill. But you won't be able to look at the tax bill and say, and know why. Right? Without actually knowing which piece of your tax rate is inside the cap and which piece of your tax rate is outside the cap. So it's not going to remain simple, I think, is the lesson there. Section H, Lake and St. Joe were going to get hit so hard by the tax caps, losing 1/3 of their property tax revenue or more, that the legislature said we'll make special exceptions for Lake and St. Joe. And we won't count their existing debt service. So they're already got their debt service exempt from the tax caps in Lake and St. Joe counties. And it's in the constitutional amendment, too. Puts it into the Constitution. It expires in 2020. And you might think, well, do we really want to put an exception for two counties into the state constitution? That kind of rubs me the wrong way in a way, except that A, it expires in 2020, and B, we're all moving in that direction. 20 years from now, after all existing debt service expires, all new debt service will have been passed by referendum and it'll be outside the cap. So eventually all the counties will be in the same category as Lake and St. Joe. So there you go. One other thing interesting here, there's something called the DUAB, the Distressed Unit Appeals Board, where, and I think Gary's the only community that have done this before, where if you're particularly stressed by these tax caps, you can go to the Distressed Unit Appeals Board and get some relief from the tax caps. That's not in the constitutional amendment. The DUAB is going to go away. There's going to be no exceptions, as far as I can tell, in the constitutional amendment. Okay, here's the ballot language. This is what's going to show up on the ballot. I personally think this thing's going to pass, because look what it says. Shall property taxes be limited for all classes of property? No. Come on. I think the polls say it's got widespread support. I suspect it's going to pass. The Farm Bureau opposes it. They've decided not to waste their money campaigning against it. I suppose if the polls start to say that it's close, maybe they'll hop in. But I don't see very much, very likely chance that this will fail. Of course, you know that's political science, and I'm an economist. But I suspect this thing's going to pass. Is that a question?
Well, on a referendum, just a quick question. Was there a correlation between pass and fail in the size of the referendum, such as was 50,000 passed, 500 million failed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually been doing some work on that, and I found some evidence, not from this past May, but from the referendum before that the higher the tax rate that was proposed, the less likely it was to pass. And an extra 10 cents knocked down the percentage yes vote by about 3%. But in May, that didn't happen. There was no correlation between the size of the rate that was proposed and whether it passed or not. I fully expect that that's going to eventually turn out to be one of the things that matters. Yeah?
It looks to me that the thing that matters the most is whether the referendum is on a regular election or primary election day or for the special election, which almost, the special elections almost never passed, and about half of the ones that were on a regular election.
Well, that's what, you know, the question is, it looks like, and when you look at the data, that certainly pops out that those elections, those referenda held in November during regular elections were more likely to pass, and those held in special elections were less likely to pass, which is exactly the opposite of what all the research says. And I haven't found, you know, once I enter into all the other stuff that might be determining what's going on, that doesn't show up as important. But I expect that's going to turn around eventually. You look at Illinois, you look at all over the place, and you know, 47 other states have this. We finally decided it was a good idea, you know, because we like to see ideas tried out first in Indiana before we do it. And the idea there is that the general elections attract a wider range of voter than the special elections do. With the special election, you can advertise to your parents, and maybe they'll be the only ones who show up. With a general election, lots of different issues. People come in, and they may not even have been aware that there was a school referendum. They look and say, no, we don't want that. This November, I suspect that well, I don't know whether any schools are going to go on November 2nd, because you're going to have this. Do you want your taxes limited? Yes. Do you want to pay more taxes? Probably not. Right? The kinds of people that are going to be brought into the voting booth are not going to be the kinds of people who are going to vote yes for a referendum. So I suspect we'll see referenda in July and August and September, and maybe the week after Election Day and that kind of thing. I think the political advice the schools will get will be not to put it on that particular ballot. But we'll see. That will be, you know, we've never had data before about what voters really think about any kind of local government spending, and now we've got it. It's, from a research point of view, it's very exciting to try to figure out what people are thinking and what this says about Indiana voters. Yeah.
How does this correspond with the proposition like California has? Is that same idea, same thought?
How does this compare to Proposition 13 way back in 1978, was it, I think, or somewhere in there? It's different in the sense that the Proposition 13 was really focused on assessed values. We were going to limit the increase in assessments. And if you think of what happens with California real estate, what happened recently and what was happening in the 70s as well, rapid increases in assessed values, because the selling prices really were going up, and California actually had back then a very good assessment system in the sense that they actually captured the increases in assessments year after year after year, and so people's property taxes were going up because the local governments were taking the windfall. There was no limit on the amount of revenue they could collect. There might have been a limit on a rate, but if you've got a limited rate and your assessed values are going up, you're going to get the extra revenue. So people's tax bills were going up, and they looked and it said it's because our assessments are increasing. So what they did was to limit the assessment increases. What we're doing is limiting the tax bills. So it's basically above the line, below the line. They've said we're actually not going to be a market value state in a sense. We are going to assess only when property changes hands, or reassess only when property changes hands. If you bought your house 20 years ago and you bought it for $200,000 and it's now worth $400,000, well, when you sell it for $400,000, we'll increase the assessment to $400,000. But until you do, you get it at $200,000. And the assessment professionals don't like that very much, because it means Two houses side by side, identical. One sold yesterday, one sold 20 years ago. This one's assessed for $400,000, this one's assessed for $200,000. And that doesn't seem equitable to a lot of people. It also means that the realtors and the lawyers really try to figure out how to make this sale of this house not look like it changed hands, right? So that the assessment doesn't go up. And so there's a lot of room for a legal maneuver in something like that. So that's the way they did it. And they limited taxes in that way. I personally think what we're doing here makes more sense because we're still keeping with the market value, which has a number of advantages, and we're limiting the tax bills off of that market value, not limiting the assessment itself. So, all right, let's see if I got this last slide. Yeah, some observations on the tax cap referendum, and then I'm done. First of all, there's no added property tax relief from the referendum. People, will go in and vote and say, do I want my taxes limited? Yes. And the next year they say, hey, my taxes are the same as they were before. And that's because we are already operating under all those rules. Everything we're going to put into the Constitution is already in law, and we're already operating under those laws right now. So there's no extra tax relief from that, from a yes vote. Two things that it will do, though. Prevents potential challenges. Take a look at the constitutional language that we've got right now. On page 15, you can see it. It says, General Assembly shall provide by law for a uniform and equal rate of property assessment and taxation. Now, is a 1%, 2%, 3% cap an equal rate of property taxation? Well, some judge might say no. Now, there are other pieces of this thing that imply that homesteads can be treated differently. But the difference between 2% and 3%, between rental housing and commercial property, I don't see that in the Constitution. That could be challenged. If we put it into the Constitution, then it can't be challenged. Then it's in the Constitution. Right? Then it's constitutional by definition. So it would prevent potential challenges. The other thing it does is prevent future property tax changes. Maybe the legislature will someday change its mind about the standard deduction, say. $45,000 standard deduction. If they eliminate the $45,000 standard deduction and homeowner taxes go up, there's a ceiling. All right, and so one thing this does is really limit what we can do with property taxes in the future. Our state, or I should say our local funding is going to have to move away from property taxes if we pass this. Three things. I think about, if I could, I'm supposed to be an educator here, so if I could educate the voters when they walk into the voting booth, what would I want them to think about? And I think three things, and this is not saying, educate them to vote yes or vote no, because, that's up to them. But three things. You got to think both sides of the budget, right? Yes, we're limiting our taxes, but what does that do to local government services? And I think there's probably three different attitudes that kind of make sense. Can our local governments be more efficient? Maybe the folks who favor limiting property taxes think that our local governments are inefficient, and one way to make them more efficient, one way to force them to become more efficient is to limit the amount of revenue that they've got. And, if you think that's true, by all means vote yes. On the other hand, if you don't think that's true, and we don't know for sure, you can't look at a budget and see how efficient local government is. If it turns out not to be true, then limiting property taxes might actually affect the level of services. Maybe you don't want that, or maybe you don't like the things that might have to be done to make local government more efficient. Do we eliminate townships, like Kern and Shepard recommended? Do we consolidate small school corporations, which nobody ever likes? Those might be the sorts of things that would have to be done to make local government more efficient. Do we want to do those things? If you don't want to do those things, maybe you don't want to limit the property tax. If you don't mind doing those things, by all means, vote yes. Second, will Indiana residents accept lower service levels? Might be people out there, and we hear from them all the time now, who simply think local government's too big. It's providing services we don't want. It's doing stuff that it shouldn't be doing. And how do you stop them from doing those things? You cut their revenue. That's how you do it. If you think local government's too big, you might vote yes. If, on the other hand, you think that local government is providing services that you like, or maybe you want to provide more, then you'd probably vote no. Third thing, maybe the people who favor and want to vote yes to limit property taxes like their local governments just fine. They want to pay for them. They just want to pay for them in some other way. They just don't like property taxes. Be perfectly happy with income taxes. Be perfectly happy with charges and fees. Just don't like property taxes. If that's the way you are, vote yes. If you like the property tax because you rent, say, maybe you vote no. So I think those are the things to think about. And I think this gives us some idea as to what the issues are going to be. Assuming this thing passes and we end up with property taxes limited on into the next decade, what are we going to see? I think we're going to see a lot of efforts towards greater efficiency. Right? I think we'll probably see a few school consolidations over the next decade. I think we'll see continual efforts to try to lessen the role of townships or maybe even eliminate them. So I think we'll see that sort of thing. I think we will see governments cut back. I think we'll see some of that as well. And I'm certain we're going to see movement to other revenue sources. For example, I think the days of paying for trash collection with property taxes are probably over, because you can shift, those cities that do it can shift the cost of their trash collection to charges and fees, actually charge for it, and free up some scarce property tax resources. Anything you can charge a fee for, I suspect there will be a fee charged for it, just to take it off property taxes. I expect we'll see a lot more adoption of local option income taxes. I expect we'll see Association of Cities and Towns, Association of Counties in the legislature year after year with proposals for more home rule, more ability to create new kinds of revenue sources. So I suspect that's what the next decade's going to look like should this thing pass. Well, that's what I have to say about Indiana property taxes in 2000.